The Apparitions Unleashed are a chaos warband of ghost-like traitor marines who haunt the worlds they assault with the seemingly random appearances of a particular warp storm which travels across the galaxy. They were created by a group of warp ghosts who were gifted the power to reanimate dead marines into a state that vaguely resembles that of the substance of demons, likely for their role in enabling the first Black Crusade fleets to break through the Eye and into Imperial real space. At the height of Abaddon's 8th Black Crusade, a mysterious rift appeared above a ruined battlefield of the planet Yog-3. With its sudden arrival came the dropship, which disembarked several dozen warriors of the Warp Ghost Chaos Warband, and one by one they awakened each fallen Astartes with strange chants before a wave of the hand brought the corpse to reanimation. In total, 300 Astartes were risen in a confused state, continuing actions that echoed their final moments before death. Strangely, injuries such as exploded heads, missing limbs and gaping holes in the torso simply vanished as if death was a mere dream, and the warp ghosts were met with resistance from both fallen loyalists and traitors before they realized that whatever power had brought them back into being made it so that their projectiles and weapons couldn't collide with the bodies of their foes, simply passing through and vanishing into the sinister mist that drifted over the wasteland like a deathly blanket trying to pacify its children. The warp ghosts, soon collectively referred to as the Undertakers by their confused recruits, harried the confused spirit marines into ethereal thunderhawks piloted by silent spirits and taken into the corridors of the fleet ship that hung below the maw of the warp storm, which became known simply as the trapezoidal door, or the door. This quote-unquote door acts quintessentially as a traveling port for the warbands of chaos, frequently making detours back to the Eye of Terror to assist the forces of chaos. Their haunted vessels are rife with spirits from across the ages, crew and personnel who tend to the inner workings of the ship by habit more so than need. Rarely do the Apparitions Unleashed wage full campaigns in the wake of their raids due to the storm's mercurial nature. As fighting on world begins to reach a crescendo of plundering and looting, the storm begins to dissipate, a process which may take 3 days, of which within that time members of the warband must make it back to the fleet before it leaves them behind. This would provide an ample opportunity for freedom from the constant command and demand of the Undertakers, if it weren't for the fact that their very undeath is weaved into the power of the storm itself. For those left behind, formless lifeless suits of armor, bubbling with a strange ectoplasmic substance that simply vanishes without a trace. Still, some members, especially those who died as staunch loyalists with traces of fealty to the Emperor left in the residual spark one might call a soul, choose this as a viable option for release, essentially committing suicide with the departure of their traveling maelstrom. A contingent of quiet leaders and splinter factions of the warp ghosts themselves rules Sorus primarily from the fleet, organizing deployments and occasionally making immense human sacrifices to the storm in order to orientate its trajectory to where they want it to go. Sometimes, however, the roaring gateway simply showers the entire fleet in an absurd nightmare hail of disappointment in the form of screeching gargoyles and demons of unaffiliated warp domains and decides to take them completely off the course they ask. The Undertakers are the name given to the warp ghosts who rule the warband from the fleet, refraining from active duty except during boarding operations. It is believed that their sinister faction was given form as a splinter group, rewarded with bizarre powers by the warp itself, and it's been noted that when speaking of the Immaterium and its denizens, they often allocate any reference to the warp as a whole aspect of reality rather than any of the chaos gods themselves. The air of mystery that surrounded the warp ghosts persists, and they veer conversations away from questions regarding their origin, purpose, or overall agenda in the great scheme of the galaxy. Due to the haunted, spectral symbolism and manifestations taken a step further than their warp ghost predecessors and reality-bending phenomena that permeate the region with the presence of its fleet, it's believed they fancy themselves as lords of a kind of afterlife, if such a thing could truly exist beyond the ravenous maws that await mortal souls in the warp. It is this obsession with ghost-like phantasmal themes that lends credence to the speculation that the Apparitions Unleashed may in fact be demon princes acting as taskmasters of their own sort of warp domain, for what could be greater than possessing power over death itself? Their minds are believed to extend far into the realm of chaos, knowing full well the full tally of names of the deceased who may be presently captured in their tainted vessels and turned towards their dark purpose. for the souls must surely be retrieved in haste, lest the treasure of such a resource slip through their grasp and become food for the hungering things beyond the realm of the physical. Many lords anxious for ascension to demonhood have contacted the undertakers for the possibility of a second chance if they fail their final trial, only to be laughed at and turned down, their next endeavor ending in tragedy and their final judgment taking place in the all-annihilating horror of their scornful gods' wrathful embrace. Indeed, their prerogative with other warbands remains upon the task of terrifying and navigating the warp, and while they dismiss speculative conjecture and curious meandering with apathetic disdain towards the Charonite officers below them, the same matter as snooping from the warbands is met with violent force in an act to prove that such things are absolutely better left as stories untold. Those who are given orders directly from the undertakers themselves are called Charonites, often resentful of their situation because they are never given any meaningful insider explanations as to the warp ghost's nature and origins. Specialist ranks. Cygnus breachers. The Cygnus breachers take part in ground battles but are used as the void warfare troops trained in boarding operations to accommodate their demoniac bunes. With strange, warped power, they kick themselves out of the airlocks of their ships, launching themselves into the void accompanied by unnatural symphonies and banshee wails that can be heard in the emptiness of space, echoing through the minds of those who behold their horror from portholes which should have been gazed through. With bizarre spectral power, they face straight into the hulls of enemy ships, in squads or as sabotaging operatives launched into the interior of their enemy ships. Their bodies have never been recovered, for the substance composing their form is tainted by the warp, and simply weeps from their broken bodies as eerie glowing miasma leaving behind a damaged, empty suit of broken power armor and the cracked dome helmet, which is the peculiar badge of their order. The dome helmet is a strange addition to their war gear, offering no material protection to the head, but seeming to deflect headshots with an aura of unluckiness as munitions seem to curve around them to avoid ever touching the abomination within the armor. They're the veteran horrors of the Apparitions, imbued with such potent demonic enhancements pertaining to their craft that they have developed abilities similar to those of warp talons, though these phasing abilities only seem to work in the void of space a short distance from the trapezoidal door. Not to be confused with normal warp talons, these veterans can be seen in a myriad of squads and using war gear ranging from the simple to the elaborate to the utterly cursed. Occasionally one will overflow with corruption beyond the containment of a normal body and develop strange limbs similar to that of demons, or even an inhuman head leering with the eldritch hatred from within the black depths of their dome helmet. It is often theorized that the Apparitions Unleashed are the ground-based quote-unquote Dogs of War sub-faction of the Warp Ghosts, an arm of the original faction established to break through their traditionally fleet-based ferryman's way of contributing to the Long War. Their raids and operations have included, but are not limited to, boarding operations, knowledge of which is passed down from the Undertakers to the Charonites to the rest of the force. Ground assaults, sieges, and unexpected small outpost raids to catch easy prey and make recruiting easier with overwhelming and hopeless odds against their enemies. Summoning demons, though this is more often to bind them into contracts to assist in roles centrifugal to the force such as recruitment. In the early days of its inception, the Warband was a confused rabble, with some newly added troops causing detriment to line and formation as they broke down into suicidal charges and attempted to wreak havoc on the Undertakers' plans by straying from dictated orders and just plain offing themselves in the enemy's line of fire, since they were unable to turn their bolters on themselves. Their personalities retained unwarped glimpses of who they once were as loyalists, sometimes causing them to wake up from the effects of the torture which converted them from the start. These have been mostly weeded out at the fault of their own nature, and sometimes thrown out of airlocks during warp transit to meet unknown and terrifying fates. Now with its ranks bloated by dead members of various warbands and legions, they organize themselves into squads accordingly, the occasional Black Legionary locating to a squad to fill a position of a fallen member of that group. Beliefs and cultures vary wildly, each member allowed to practice and worship the pantheon as he sees fit in his own quarters, with the Undertakers planting a firm boot down on any who descend into rivalries over such matters. Because of their hollowed-out state, the Apparitions Unleashed can only feel the extent that memory and nerves buried within the meat of their statically undecaying bodies allow. Similar to the simulated sensations allowed for in certain advanced dreadnought constructions, what they experience feels like a distant shell of life, like a flavorless meal devoid of math. To compensate for this, the Apparitions Unleashed often engage in going the extra mile in their chaos worship, hoping their god permits them to feel the thrills and experiences they hold dear. This can be seen exponentially in the possessed, whose demonic consciousnesses are a transcendent reward, once again allowing them to feel the warmth of their enemy's blood or the smell of their fear. Second in popularity to this method of experiencing life once more, strong followings of Slanesh and Nurgle exist within their ranks, giving them the chance at the thrills of excess or the semblance of life borrowed from the pestilence which riddles their minds and bodies. Even the agony of despair brought by a blight inflames them with the experience of being, filling the hollow void that separates their residual souls from finding true meaning in their existence. This seems to reinforce a pecking order between the Undertakers and the Apparitions. Those who are newly drawn into the ranks will suffer displaced feelings of separation from their own experience of life, and so they will strike a fanatical pact with Chaos as worshippers to relieve themselves of such damnation. More intimate with Chaos than mere plunderer and pirate warbands, they will go to great lengths of sacrifice and toil to further their favor with their god, gain in power, and therefore liberate themselves from the misery of feeling void. Such a preoccupation keeps them from falling out of line. No apparition warrior has ever left the ranks to join another warband, for separation from the storm is separation from life, though a few have seemingly ascended to demonhood through the ages and joined the cohorts of the warp itself. This is something that the Undertakers feel is an earned rite of passage onto the next life. Despite this, said demonkin have returned through the gateway to fight alongside their Astartes brethren in the name of humanity's ultimate ascension to chaos. Unable to perform proper gene seed implementation, the Apparitions Unleashed bolster their ranks through the mysterious necromantic art of the Undertakers, something that has a 1-to-4 success ratio. Indeed, bartering for bodies with other groups in the Eye of Terror is commonplace, as was in their successor the Warp Ghosts. Never at a point of despair after receiving some losses, and never wavering their silence in light of questions, the Undertakers don't allow able-bodied fighting numbers to exceed 1,200, a statute suspiciously in line with the Codex Astartes. It is believed that this power is a reward given to a number of the original Warp Ghosts after the height of the 8th Black Crusade, being the ferrymen who opened the door for Abaddon's war during the first, and therefore paving the path for Chaos's continued assaults on the Imperium. The Undertakers view the corpses of fallen Marines as esoteric tomes of occult power, the sinews and neurons within the flesh a vessel containing words of power and resurrection. The body itself is viewed as a grimoire which they have power to rewrite as they see fit. They discard that which they see as useless or baneful to their cause, replacing their essence with whatever they deem worthy of the individual's quote-unquote final draft. It is believed that the Undertakers are actually ascended demon princes in their own right, taking on the Astartes form to better coax the damned along the path they have paved. They remain in the fleet at all times as their role is too vital to the warband to risk losing on the fields of battle, and so it is the Apparitions Unleashed themselves who bring the corpses to the morticians of damnation after each battle. After a corpse is taken into the depths of the Lyre of Calixes, it is brought into dark ritual chambers mirroring those of apothecarians, the process resembling a combination of surgical procedures and arcane rituals utilizing wards and diabolical sigils etched onto cold metal slabs. Once awoken, they are brought to the asylum-like corridors where unsanctioned psychers once suffered at the hands of imperial captors and subjected to forms of mind-altering warp torture. Gargoyles taunt these new inceptions, howling dirges of despair that reflect their innermost thoughts to challenge and crush previously held faith. Psychic torment is unleashed by demons bound to the will of the Undertakers, and the maddened screams and supplications swift into broken cries of acceptance. Chaos Marines felled at the hands of the Apparitions Unleashed are easier to compel, often falling in line quite easily to their second lease on life. Those who died in the battlefields of the galaxy often appear mid-warp transit as confused spirits who somehow found their way into pseudo-materialization. A notable number of these are spirits of guardsmen, ship crew, rogue traders, and others who died hating their service to the Emperor in their final moments, likely due to being placed in suicidal charges by their commanders or perhaps sent on doomed journeys by their captains. These resentful lesser ghosts soon go back to their day-to-day routines with true awareness drifting in and out of dreamlike states of being, never truly alive or dead, and, given the state of the galaxy, a blissful fate compared to many others. These are the very recently deceased, perceptions of time being fickle across the galaxy, though the appearance of people the apparitions have killed in their most recent onslaughts have confirmed that the transfer from the warp is nigh instantaneous, for any amount of time spent in the warp for a soul is likely doomed to become a morsel for the ravenous things that hunt the scraps of lives that once were. There's also a living cult following of humans on board the vessels, and renegades and pirates who found no other port in the storm but the fleet of the Apparitions unleashed. These often make their way to other fleets in the Eye, or try to stay on the worlds they raid in an attempt to disengage themselves from the strange haunts of the Apparitions' ships. The Company of Spectral Sisters are another group within the fleet who are believed to be the spirits of sororitas battle sisters that died without the glory of martyrdom in their hearts, but harboring regret at their death in the name of the Emperor. These sororitas are spared the sentient misery embraced by their counterparts by being trapped in an eternal dream of believing they're fighting the enemies of the Imperium. They're full-blown ghosts in the fact that other than being perceivable, they cannot perceive or have a physical effect on the inhabitants of the vessel. Their gunfights and disembodied screaming are thought of as anything from annoying distractions from routine to endearing, humorous, and amusing to those who get to witness the passing displays of phantasmagorical fanaticism as it roams their flagship, the Lyre of Calyxes. The fleet, while not massive, is always large enough to transport sector-destroying numbers of Chaos Marines and renegades. Unnumbered smaller transport craft and fighters garnish hangar bays seeping with glowing spectral light, and those Imperial Voidsmen who have encountered the vessels report hearing songs and wails with their presence. The ships themselves remain hovering in the maw of the trapezoidal gate, keeping them insubstantiated so that they're nigh impossible to fire upon without coming dangerously close to the storm, which, for all intents, is an unfriendly devouring kraken to any enemy ship. Even the demon ships once thought destroyed successfully have occasionally re-emerged from the bowels of the warp, a sacrifice being made by the undertakers to appease their rebirth and refilled with crew members from the Eye of Terror and beyond. The Astartes of this haunted legion appear in the manner similar to warp ghosts, with unearthly dirges emanating from the ground out of nowhere, and strange lights cascading in the sky. Day turns to night unnaturally, and roaming bands of human ghosts playing demonic instruments are a common precursor to the full-on assaults that emerge from drifting veils of fog. Their armor, a bleached bone white, gives off an eerie glow of greens and blues as ichor weeps from the cracks in their armor. Kumite warriors, as raging in unlife as in living, seethe with hot red and orange hues and hateful fiery eyes. Not true ghosts in the form of non-material beings, they are referred to as spirits only for lacking of a better word, and are certainly not zombies in the usual sense. Gene seed implementations is a no-go for recruiting, though it has been tried before with utterly horrifying consequences. Their bodies, dead but static, with no natural process of decay, something their warp ghost lords seem proud of. The Warband has adopted the symbol of the trapezoid representing the trapezoidal door. Its variations range from the simple geometric shape lined with sigils to the artistically rendered organic maw with angles more directly resembling the force which binds them all. Alongside this, the traditional warp ghost's iconography and a totem pole of heads facing opposite directions in the fashion of the ancient Terran myth of Janus, who was said to be the master of doorways and locks. It's worth noting that those who fight alongside the Apparitions Unleashed may be forced to fight as if they aren't receiving support from the Warband. At any moment, the trapezoidal door may begin dissolving back into the Immaterium, a matter of absolute urgency to the Apparitions fighters, who will immediately stop what they're doing, no matter how important, to simply pack up and return back to the fleet. Those who take such a gamble lightly and rely too much on the Warband for help will be doomed to fight their own battle against potentially hazardous odds.